So welcome to another Behind the Theme. Today we'll be talking about Twilight Struggle again. Last time we talked about how Twilight Struggle made you feel like a world leader of either the Americans or Soviet Union during the Cold War. Today we'll be talking about how several other aspects of the Twilight Struggle really makes you feel like you are in the Cold War. So let's get into it. Now the first thing that we'll talk about is the Proxy Wars. Now the Proxy Wars in history were of course like Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan. And the idea behind it was that both powers wanted to avoid mutually assured destruction, MAD, MAD, because of their nuclear arsenal. So they couldn't be seen fighting a hot war, meaning that both sides would get into direct conflict, American troops versus literally Soviet Union troops. So the weirdest thing you will see is that every time one side got involved in a hot war, be it the Americans versus the Koreans or the Vietnamese, you will see that the Soviet Union troops won't get directly involved. And same thing with Afghanistan, when Soviet Union troops got involved, the Americans didn't get directly involved. In fact, the Americans helped the Mujahideen. So this is what the Proxy Wars were all about. It was that they were basically the Americans fighting the Soviet Union, but they used other people to do it. It's like Rome, where Rome would use border states like Palmyra and all, where it wouldn't be profitable. The Romans wouldn't want to take a state, not because it wasn't profitable in terms of money, but because if they took it and they lost it, it will be hurt to their pride, and on top of that, usually they do not see that they could hold the situation. They could hold the area against, for example, the Sassanid Empire, and so on and so forth. So instead, they would support this area, but they wouldn't get directly, they don't directly control it, meaning that even if they lost it, if that area was taken, they could still say it wasn't Roman territory that was lost. And it gave them time to build up their army, while the enemy was fighting that border state. So that is also shown like in the game of Twilight Struggle, whereby sometimes you will put influence, remember influence can be anything, be it troops, money or whatever, into an area or state, whereby you had no intention of really turning the state into democratic or communist, but you just wanted there so that, remember that you could only put influence linked to other influence that you had on the board unless a card allows you to do otherwise. So many times you will put something there so that you could either, if your enemy puts influence, you could remove it, meaning that he couldn't get to an important part. The other is Eurocentrism and globalization, which you really feel in the game and did happen in history for Singapore. So don't worry, this will not be a rant on how, the whole of history is Eurocentric, but actually it makes sense to me that, especially in the early part of the Cold War, that there was a Eurocentrism in the game. In the game, this is represented by the Europe scoring card, whereby any time in the game, when the Europe scoring card scores, if you lose by domination, alright, that means you totally lose Europe. You lose the game. And that makes sense, because if that would be a big blow. I mean, Europe was, you have to understand, where the richest states were, the most dangerous states were. So most of the nuclear arsenal was there. They had the most influence around the world. Look at Africa, and of course you could look at Asia, where like Philippines, you have Marcos, Sukarno in Indonesia and all that. They basically would turn to whoever gave them money and make them richer. The influence they could espouse was mostly local. So this Eurocentrism made sense. And there will, of course, like if one kind of government lost Europe, the reverberations would have been too great. And the rest of the world would probably have fallen. So it made sense. But just like history, I like how this whole theme became very globalized. Alright, because if, like, later on in the game, you concentrate on Europe always usually in the early game, but what happens is that you have to spread your influence around the world. This sense of globalization, because if you allow like Africa or Southeast Asia or even Asia to just, you don't bother with them, you're gonna lose the game almost assuredly. Like the best example I think is Southeast Asia, whereby a lot of the states take very little influence to turn to your side. So if you had no influence in the area and your opponent had it, and he just kept spreading, when the Southeast Asia card scores, if you had one state, it didn't matter, you only lost basically a point. But if you let the whole of Southeast Asia fall, you can lose upwards 6 points, which is a lot, meaning because you can win by 20 points. Oh, and of course, the whole theory like in Southeast Asia and Asia, where you don't let, like example, Vietnam fall, because if Vietnam fall, then Cambodia will fall to communism, then Thailand, and so on. This is called the domino theory, which Eisenhower came up with. The last one is information is power. Now, this is usually a criticism of Twilight Struggle, whereby a player who actually knows the game better is always said to be able to beat someone who doesn't, because he knows what the cards and the effects and everything. And the criticism makes sense and all, but to me that actually adds to the theme, because You know, as a world leader, information is power. If you knew what your opponent wanted to do, you could actually counter it. Whereby if you go in blind, you would lose. In the game, you know, like there's a card, from my personal experience, the De Gaulle card. De Gaulle was the leader of France after the war, and what he did was that he wanted France to become a great nation again. So what he did, instead of turning towards and just putting all his help democracy, he actually, you know, went to talk to the Soviet Union, thus playing the Soviet Union against the Americans and Americans against the Soviet Union, and thus making France actually having more influence than it should have. He just stuck to helping the Americans. And so in the game, what happens is that you have the De Gaulle card, which actually removes the American influence in France. So if you knew the game, you would actually put influence other parts of Europe other than France until that card got played, unless you really had to. Now, this is like in real history. Now, in 2016, the presidential elections in America, Donald Trump basically is running for president. And one of his stands is basically that he would build a wall on the border with America and Mexico, and he would get the Mexicans to pay for it. How is he going to do this? He has no details. He just says he's going to get to do it. And this is like information is power, is why I feel that right now he's riding high on the polls, but I don't think at the end people will vote for him because there's no details. You know, I think a lot of people nowadays are very informed, and you know, when you see someone talk such ludicrous kind of promises, you know they can't keep it. You know, whereby how's he going to get Mexico to pay for it? He says trade sanctions, right? But then at the same time America will suffer, right? And even then, would it be worth it for Mexico to then pay for it? You see, none of the details were given, so everything is left to speculation, and thus, you know, information again is power. But like in our recent election in Singapore, I think the best speech was given by a minister called Tharman. He's an Indian minister, and he talked about how he felt that welfare of a certain kind was not good for our country, and he gave a lot of details. You could actually search for all these reports online, and again, because of people could find that information online and it could be backed up, people trusted him. And you know, I felt that was one of the speeches that really did help the government get back into power. Just like if you learning through the game, or you knowing the cards in the game, just like in the Cold War, where if you knew through spies and everything what your opponent was doing, you could actually spread your influence much more, just like in the Cold War. That is how I feel several other ways that Twilight Struggle really brings out the theme of the Cold War. And let me know what you think. Let me know did I miss something? Do you think that I missed something that was important in the game that really brings out the flavor of the Cold War? Let me know, and thank you very much. Till next word.